Yeah, I remember Glenn Ramsey. He had all these notes on something we were taking, and I said, Brother Ramsey, can we get a copy of your notes? And he said, I made my notes, you make yours. Man, where's the day of the flash drives?
Hey, I remember.
Is she okay? Oh, she's getting something to eat. Okay, never mind.
Oh, yeah. I remember we were sitting in class. I don't remember who it was, but anyway, they had a notebook, and they had it open up there. And someone walked up there and was just like flipping through it, looking.
Woo!
I was about had a stroke, and I always sat in the very back in the top. And I thought to myself, you're
flirting with disaster.
I seizure. I said, you're touching those notes. Man, I think it might have been Mosier. You know what they had done? He'd come in and watched him, got your finger in his nose.
What's that? I bet he couldn't have caught him. He's slow. I'd have cut around the table.
No, I mean, the door was right there.
Oh.
If he'd have stepped in and saw him flipping through those notes.
Yep.
I can make you a copy.
Got any cash?
Oh.
Come on, Rick.
Oh,
Killing business here. There you go,
You can't
Carmen.
be mean to Sister Carmen.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, well, hey, good deal. All right, well, here we are. This is next to the last class. We've got 2 hours next week. And so, please show up. I hear everybody going, 2 hours? Chapter 51 is actually a continuation of chapter 52, 51 is a continuation of chapter 50. It's talking about the fall of Babylon continually. And remember, there are no chapter divisions or verse divisions in the original. So those have been added by men, and sometimes we're not real happy with where they are, but that's where they are. And like 2 Corinthians, into 2 Corinthians 6 and 2 Corinthians 7, and just nothing you can do about it other than realize, that's the way it is. And but before we get started, any announcements y'all had tonight that need to be picked up on? Maybe need to be.
Denise Wilson, one of our members, had a stroke.
Oh, well, I hate to hear that.
She did have a mild stroke. Did y'all heard that?
Mild, huh? Good deal.
It did affect her left side.
It did? Boy, we're living to get older now, and so many things pop up, and anyway, whatever you do, talking about getting older and sickness and so forth, do not read RFK's book on Anthony Fauci, because it'll make you never want to go to the hospital again, see a doctor or anything else. I cannot believe, and it must be true. You know why I know that? Nobody sued him, and so I'm just like, brethren, I tell you. Anyway, that was extra, by the way. You don't have to pay for that. Let's go ahead and have a prayer before we begin, shall we? Our Father in heaven, Lord, we're thankful for this day. We're thankful for this school. We're thankful for this opportunity to be able to come together and study about Jeremiah. Thankful for his life. Thankful you selected him, and he was the soldier for you that you asked him to be, and a prophet to the nations. And Father, we're just thankful for his example. Thankful for this book. And we pray, Father, that as we study it, you'd help bless us and help us to open our minds and to take something from it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, chapter 51. I wanted to jump in here with you on this. This is called an atbash. And you may look on the back side of that. Do you see that's the Hebrew alphabet? And the reason I'm showing you that is because that's what an atbash is. It's code. Very simple code, but code nonetheless. And if you ever want to learn Hebrew, let me recommend you go and learn the songs. Like this is Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, Epsilon. Oops, that's Greek. Aleph, Bet, and Gimel, Dalet, Hey, and Vav, and Zion. Aten, Taten, Yod, and Kav, Lama, Mem, Nun, Samik, Ayin, Phi, Yisade, Kaf, and Reese, Sin, and Shin, and Tav. You see that little thing that looks like a W? it has two different sounds. If it had a dot over it, it would be a sheen. And since how it doesn't, it is a sin, a sin. Boy, that markers really gets away, don't it? You know, I probably am the one that left it there. Y'all see it's on the, yeah. Okay, and so if you take that first letter, looks like a funny looking X. You see what I'm talking about? That's Aleph. Well, y'all have it there. I don't know why I'm writing it out. You have the Bet. And so what this does, you take the first letter, the alpha, A, and notice you have T, which is tau. Down at the bottom, the very last letter in the Hebrew alphabet is kind of looks like, I don't know what it looks like. But it has a little foot on it. That helps you. And that's the tau. That's the last letter in the alphabet. And you see the one right up from in. Looks like that W. If it has a little dot on it, it has a different sound than if it doesn't have a dot. Now, why do I mention that? So you take the last letter, Aleph, and the last letter, tau, so you get the at, and then the letter B, beta, and sheen, so at bash. The ba sound and H sound, sh, okay? Aleph, tau, beta, and sh. And so that's where that comes from. That's a Hebrew thing, okay? And so they play, and the reason I want you to see that is the very first thing we find there in verse 51. This is from the Truth for Today commentary. This is the second volume, of course, of Jeremiah. They took up 2. And I want you to notice verse 1. He says, verse 1 also indicates that the invading armies were coming against the people of Leb-Kamai. Now, if you have a King James Version, it didn't say that at all, does it? But if you have a newer version, you know, something translated, you know, ASV translates it this. Some ESV. Anybody else have like that word there? You have a different reading than, if I get there, it'd be great. Hey, keep it down back there. Bunch of yahoos, I tell you what. All right. Verse 1. Do you see, now I have this underlined in mine. Do you see beginning with the letter the in the last statement? The midst of them that rise up against me. That is Leb-Kamai. And that is a code word. Leb-Kamai is a code word that means, you can see, is a code word. It comes out, if you cipher it, if you use this method, it comes out to Chaldeans. And so it's a way that they could hide a word, and if you weren't Hebrew, you wouldn't know it. And I just think that's neat. And I spend way too much time with such things like that, but I've always been interested in languages. When my parents used to speak Pig Latin around me, I learned it before I would tell them, of course, so I could tell what they were saying. You know, they were trying to hide things from me. So I want you to see that because the Bible, like any good literature, it uses different types of literature to teach us. You have narratives, which is just the storytelling, David and Goliath there. You have poetry, such as the Songs of Solomon. You have hyperbole. If you take the hermeneutics class that I'm fortunate enough to get a chance to teach every now and then, we talk a lot about synecdoche, where one word is used for the whole. The like figure whereunto baptism doth also now save us. Well, baptism there is obviously used as a synecdoche of everything that we do to obey the gospel. You just can't run and grab people and throw them under the water and say, hey, there they go, they're saved. So that's a synecdoche. But when the Lord says, if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, well, I can't begin to tell you how much trouble that caused me as a young person reading that. I didn't know any. I'd never even heard of what I used to call it, hyperbole. The first time I ever saw it, I thought it was hyperbole. Then somebody said, you mean hyperbole? And I said, no, hyperbole. That's right here. They said, that's pronounced Hyperbole. I was going like, says who? But anyway, they were right. I was wrong. But hyperbole is an exaggeration. And so what you have in Matthew chapter 5, you have a bunch of people who are teaching part of the Bible, but they're not teaching that. They're extremists. They show no mercy. You could make Matthew the theme of that being mercy, and you would do that book no disservice. And they weren't merciful. They were extremists. They were all about themselves and money and so forth. And so sometimes in order to wake an extremist up, you've got to use extreme verbiage. Don't you know when Jesus said you need to cut your hand off? That people are like, wait a minute, what did he just say? Because you know how people sleep in the middle of a sermon. One of the things you learn as a preacher is that you actually talk in other people's sleep. You get that? You know how you talk in your sleep? Anyway. So you know how people will go to sleep sometimes? You say, well, you need to cut your hand off. Immediately. Of course, he probably got their attention when he said, if your right eye offend thee, pluck it out. And so they started listening up then, And obviously, if that was the case, then all of us we wouldn't have any limbs left, right? Because you can sin with a nub just as well as you can sin with or your left hand and so forth. So hyperbole. So I wanted you to see that there are interesting things you find in the book of Revelation. You find symbols, you find analogies, you find, just neat little language tricks. Even the way some of the whole Hebrew text is set up, where it kind of starts out saying one thing, and then it says it again, but it says it like backwards, the structure and so forth. It's just really interesting. And so I think sometimes it's good to stop for a moment. And if you notice this, you see up here where he says plain text, Schrute Farms. If you were to use this, that's exactly how the Hebrews would do it, but this is using the English alphabet. And we need an S, so we go to S, and we go up, when you see, we need an S, so we go to S, and then we go above it, you see it's H. And so then we need a C, so we go to C, or X, and wait a minute, I'm doing it backwards. We got a C, so we need a C, so we drop down, we take the X, so we got HX, and then we need the next letter, of course, is H, so we go to H and drop down, it's an S. Do you see how that works? If you don't, it took me a minute. Okay, check it out, Schrute Farms, right? So you find the S, we go to S on the top line, and you drop down to where you have the alphabet inverted, and there's an H. So you use that. And then we need a C, so on that top line, we go to C, and then drop down, and you see we have an X. And so what you're doing is you're making a code, if you will. This happens a couple of times in this chapter, and that's why I wanted to address it a little bit, just because I think it's pretty neat. The name then parallels Babylon in the previous line. So you've got Babylon being spoken of. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will raise up against Babylon. And then the parallel line below it, in the midst of them, or this Lebkamai, if you will, you have Chaldeans. And notice what's happening here. Everybody good with that? Did you find that interesting at all? Okay, I hope, because that happens several times in Scripture, and it's interesting, and I hope that you can learn a little bit from it. You notice that little highlighted text I have there at the bottom? That's the Hebrew, and that is what is used as the cipher. You can see it under the bold up here in this paragraph, Lebkamai, this name, and then you see it, and remember it's backwards because they read right to left. That's Lebkamai, and if you go through that with the Hebrew, you have the letters for what would mean Chaldea. And so just a code word for them. Any questions? I probably couldn't answer it, but anyway, now you know what an ash bat is if somebody asks you. I would have thought that was just a hardwood baseball bat, wouldn't you? Made out of ash. That's what they're, you use them. Oh, anyway. Notice you got a hurricane started here, a destroying wind. He says, and I will send unto Babylon fanners. Now, fanners, sometimes you may see in pictures people winnowing grain, where they will take the grain and toss it up, and if you didn't have enough air going, you'd get somebody to help the process, And so I will send unto Babylon fanners, that shall fan her, and shall empty her land, for in the day of trouble they shall be against her round about. So he's sending this wind, and just like you use wind to winnow the grain, God is going to winnow Babylon. Against him that bendeth the archer, against him that bendeth, let the archer bend his bow. Against him that lifteth himself up in his brigandine, that could be, ASV has coat of mail. You look it up, it's going to have armor. You know, they've got their armor, they've got their archers. And so, spare ye not her young men, destroy her utterly, all her host. There's nothing they can do about it. Their defenses are not going to work against the God of heaven, who is going to destroy Babylon. Thus the slain shall fall in the land of the Chaldeans, and they that are thrust through in her streets. Death in the streets. You're going to have this terrible hurricane of tempest coming. The wind's going to thresh out the grain, if you will. There's nothing they can do to defend it, and ultimately there's going to be a lot of bodies in the street. Notice, for Israel hath not been forsaken, nor Judah of his God. They had just destroyed, or in the process, we're speaking practically in the prophetic perfect here, this is something that's already going to take place, of the Lord of hosts, though their land was filled with sin against the Holy One. Yes, they sinned against God. God has used Babylon to punish them, but God has not forsaken. They have not been forsaken. It may feel as though they have, but they have not been. Flee out of the midst of Babylon, and deliver every man his soul. Be not cut off in her iniquity, for this is the time of the Lord's vengeance, and he will render unto her a recompense. Babylon hath been a golden cup in the Lord's hand, that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine, therefore the nations are mad. Everybody liked Babylon that traded with her and so forth. She's been very prosperous. She's been very powerful. God has used her as his tool, but Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. Howl for her and take balm for her pain, if so be she may be healed. We would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Forsake her, and let us go up every one to his own country, for her judgment reacheth unto heaven, and is lifted up to the skies. The Lord hath brought forth out of righteousness, come and let us declare in Zion the work of the Lord. And now look who's going to be the instrument behind that. Make bright the arrows, gather the shields. The Lord hath raised up the spirit of the king of the Medes. Now we're a long ways from that time. Nebuchadnezzar is still the king, and he's going to have the Chaldeans are going to be around for a while. And what you have going on here is these two chapters talking about something that would be very hard to believe if you were living in that time. You're going to have this great empire that has this capital city that has these walls that are so huge. She has this powerful army. Her tentacles of power are throughout the world. How is this ever going to take place? And yet God is going to say several times in this chapter that the walls are going to be destroyed, that Babylon is going to be destroyed. And it would have been like, I was in Germany from 84 to 86, and went up to the East German border once, and I didn't go to the wall. That would have required me to get on a train, and I had what was called a top security clearance for nuclear weapons, and so I wasn't allowed to be in East Germany because you got to go through a piece of anyway. When if you'd have told me that within 10 years that wall is going to come down and all the because I went up there and you're there, I was with some German friends, and we went up on motorcycles, so I looked like all the other Germans, with my helmet on. And they're looking at you with binoculars. They have automatic weapons. There's, you see these big high fences with all this concertina wire above it and dirt road around it where they drive their vehicles ever so often. And then you see this plowed area behind it. Well, it's not plowed for the purpose. It's a minefield. And they tell people that that's to keep the West Germans out. And if you go to the West German, on the West German side, that's 50 feet away. On the West German side is a white pole with a little blue line around it. That was their border. And then you had all of that, but that was to keep the West Germans out because, you know, everybody was beating the door down to get over there. Oh, my. I think about Korea sometimes, just how terrible the North Koreans have it. And, you know, how just taking just contraband like like earpods, you know, or a iPhone or something like that. I mean, that'll get you put in prison for life. Unreal. But here this great kingdom is. Let's go ahead and look at question 1 before we get too far away from it. More than once in this chapter, we read about the walls of Babylon. How large were the walls of ancient Babylon? How you know, and so I gave you several measurements that I saw. One was 87 feet. The other was 50. Grotius, Rossenmuller said the 87. Curtius, quoted by John Gill, says they were 32 feet broad. Herodotus says they were 50 royal cubits. And Diodorus said that 2 chariots with 4 horses each could pass. And one of the things that happens a lot of times when you're talking about epic things, you know, sometimes it can be exaggerated, you know. And, you know, I think me and Josh were talking, because some people have said this wall went for 300 miles, but that's not really what the shovels are turning up. There's more, you know, much less, probably about a fifth of that at the most. But it's a pretty significant thing. And I thought that was one of the interesting things. If you look that up, you can see some of the wall. And in the wall inscribed, it read, it's Baal, I believe, Baal. It says it later in the chapter, protects. The false god of Baal, B-E-L. Most of the time we think of Baal, we have to be careful because if we think of B-A-A-L, that's more Canaanite. And this Baal is more Chaldean. It's the Chaldean god. And they had in the walls, Baal protects. And so I think it's very interesting when God says, I'm going to tear down those walls. Basically, what is he saying? Baal ain't doing so much protection. You know, we've got that whoop. So there's some figures that I have. Pliny says it's about 60 miles around, and Pliny had a tendency to be somewhat more accurate than a lot of those people. I don't know why. Well, I think, you know, in that time you didn't have too many great things to go look at. And so when people saw it, I think they'd try to write back and kind of give an idea of, you know, what they saw. And, you know, I guess the better the numbers, the more you sell or something. I don't know. But it says, in what sense would the fall of Babylon be Jehovah's judgment? Well, and boy, that jumped way out there, didn't it? That's a punishment of Baal, the false god of Babylon. And so we'll try to read a little bit more before we get there. Let's back up to the king of the Medes is going to be the one that's delivering this. Notice verse 12. Set up the standard upon the walls of Babylon. Make the watch strong. Set up the watchmen. Prepare the ambushes, for the Lord hath been devised and done that which he spake against the inhabitants of Babylon. O thou that dwellest upon many waters, abundant in treasures, thine end is come, and the measure of thy covetousness. The Lord of hosts hath sworn by him, saying, surely I will fill thee with men as with caterpillars, and they shall lift up a shout against thee. He hath made the earth by his power. He hath established the world by his wisdom. He hath stretched out the heaven by his understanding. And when he uttered his voice, there is a multitude of waters in the heavens, and he causeth the vapor to ascend to the ends of the earth. He maketh the lightnings with rain. All these things that God has done and is capable of doing, you can just about rest assured what's going to take place here is exactly what he says. Verse 20, thou art my battle axe and weapons for war. I believe this is talking about Babylon, even though I know we just finished a discussion there about the Medes who are going to come in. But I think this is talking about Babylon because I think it ties in with verse 24. Notice he says, I will render unto Babylon and to all the inhabitants of Chaldea all their evil that they have done in Zion in your sight, saith the Lord. I believe he's talking about how Babylon had been the battle axe, the weapon of war. And verse 21, and with thee I will break in pieces the horse, the rider, and that's exactly what took place. But I believe he's talking about that's, of course, who's going to be punished. Babylon's going to be punished. It says, behold, I am against thee, O destroying mountain. Some think this is talking about the size of the walls, that people would look at Babylon as being like a mountain. Do you remember, Josh, some of the figures of how tall they thought those walls were? That's a football field, isn't it? That's pretty high. That one fellow I quoted a while ago, Diodorus, he said, once again, you got to be careful about exaggerations, okay? But he said that it took 200,000 Chaldean workers a year to build the wall. And I don't know if it was really 200,000. I mean, sometimes we have a, tendency to exaggerate some things. But let's just say it was 50,000. I think that's about right. Because we've had, maybe 1,000 people working on the Chickamauga Dam locks now for at least 25 years. And they ain't getting anywhere. I cannot believe that. I'm glad I ain't a boat sitting out there trying to go downriver. I just think it's amazing how many times that project started, stopped. And still, you go by there and all you got is a bunch of cranes. Anyway, maybe the Army Corps engineers will get it going. But 300 feet, that's pretty high. And I can see if you were, walking around that thing, you might think that's good as a mountain. However, remember in Isaiah chapter 2 when let's just take a look at it. Back up a little bit. Book of Isaiah, right before this one, Isaiah chapter 2, of course, talking about the establishment of the church. Remember what it says. It shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains. There, mountains are not talking about just something being high. Mountains were oftentimes used to talk about governments and powers and things of that nature. When the heavens are shaken and the earth seems to be an earthquake, a lot of times that's talking about turmoil. Like, say, the Grecians, attacking you and taking over the world. Alexander was so quick. That's can be referring to that, so be real careful about being dogmatic about that. It says, we destroy all the earth, I will stretch mine hand upon thee and roll thee down from the rocks, and will make thee a burnt mountain. And they shall not take of thee a stone or a corner, nor a stone for foundations. In other words, the destruction is going to be, which kind of leans back towards talking about maybe it is the height of the wall, but it's going to be so complete that there's not going to be anything left to rebuild. There's not going to be something you could use as a cornerstone, but thou shalt be desolate forever. And notice things go bad, and they're trying to prepare, verse 28. Well, let's look at the confederation here, verse 27. Set up a standard in the land, blow the trumpet among the nations, prepare the nations against her, call together against her the kingdoms of Ariat, Mini, and Ashkenaz, appoint a captain against her, cause the horse to come up with rough caterpillars, prepare against her the nations with the king of the Medes. So you're going to have all these nations that are going to rise up, and that's exactly what happens. You have we call it the Medo-Persian Empire. You have the kingdom of the Medes. It's kind of a loose confederation, but they come together. And then you have the Persian kingdom, which we read about later, that got really, really big. What would you call that place today? Persia. What country is that today? That is Iran, absolutely. It was bigger back then. Boy, aren't we glad it got whittled down a little bit. But anyway, it had 127 provinces, and they had a Pony Express thing kind of set up, where they could get one message from almost India all the way over to Europe, and they could do that in a week. You just think that's smoking right there, isn't it? I'm glad I wasn't one of those guys. But anyway, they're going to come together, prepare the nations with the kings of the Medes, and they're going to let them loose. And notice, verse 29, and the land shall tremble in sorrow. For every purpose of the Lord shall be performed against Babylon, to make the land of Babylon a desolation, without an inhabitant. You can just imagine those horses. You can imagine chariots rolling. It would have been enough to strike fear in you for sure. Notice the mighty men of Babylon have forborne to fight. If you look that up, that word forborne means to stop or cease to be. So these mighty warriors who the women of Judah were so enamored with early on, and all their flowing whatever uniforms they had that made them so attractive, or anyway, they're going to lose their will. They have remained in their holes. They won't come out. Their might hath failed. They become as women. Now, brethren, we live in a day and age where, a lot of people want to say, well, there's not a whole lot of difference between a man and a woman. Well, there's a lot of difference between a man and a woman, especially if they're raised right. Women are not to, go out there and be the man. And men are not supposed to be effeminate. Not supposed to dress like women. Not supposed to walk like women, talk like women, or have surgery to try to make themselves women. That is perversion. And so here, men that are supposed to be leading the fight are doing anything but. They're scared. 31, one post shall run to meet another, and one messenger to meet another, and that's how quick it is. All these guys are running out saying, Babylon is fallen. The city is taken at one end. And the passages are stopped. The reeds they have burned with fire, and the men of war are affrighted. You remember how this took place? And this is where sometimes when we're reading prophecy, boy, just having a little bit of background in the Bible. Remember the book of Daniel? Now Daniel is over in Chaldea already. The place that we're talking about is going to be destroyed. And you remember he's getting to be an aged man. Some people think he might be almost 90 or in his 90s. When there's a fella, the last of the lines of the Chaldean kings by the name of Belteshazzar. And you remember he's having a party, and he's drinking out of the cups and so forth from the Lord's house. And remember the hand that appears and, writes many, tekel upharsin, I believe it is, and kind of scares him to death. Well, that night he dies. And it's believed that the Medes actually stopped the water, the river that ran through Babylon, which they were able to go through on dry ground instead of having to, navigate the waters to get into the city. But also, it's believed they probably had some inside help. It's not like, you know how it is. If you read about any kind of wars, there's people that are spying. There's people who are working for the other team, so to speak. I read something the other day that, well, that's not here and there. But it's bad to have somebody treasonous, that's working for the other guys, and then you find that out when they're holding a gun to your head. Well, anyway, that's exactly how that takes place. And Cyrus, in his scrolls, writes that he took Babylon without a major battle, without a fight. They just laid down, and so to speak. So that tells you probably people knew that was going to take place and were not surprised when it did, and didn't put up a whole lot of resistance when it did. And I think that, that might have had something to do with the Jews coming out so well in that too. There wasn't a big siege. A lot of people didn't die of starvation, you didn't have all this artillery firing into the city. And so there just wasn't a whole lot of devastation. Cyrus basically went into a perfectly set up place. You can't beat that. Let's drive on down. They have verse 33, for thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, the daughter of Babylon is like a threshing. We've already talked about it. That's when the wheat and so forth. It is time to thresh her. Yet a little while, and the time of her harvest shall come. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, hath devoured me. He hath crushed me. Now this is a complaint, of course, of Israel. She's crushed me. He hath made me an empty vessel. He hath swallowed me up like a dragon. He hath filled his belly with my delicacies. He hath cast me out. And notice the quote, the violence done to me and to my flesh be upon Babylon. shall the inhabitants of Zion say. That's what they say. You know, punish them, Lord, if you will. And my blood upon the inhabitants of Chaldea shall Jerusalem say. Therefore saith the Lord, okay. Behold, I will plead thy cause, I will take vengeance for thee, and I will dry up her sea, and I will make her springs dry, and Babylon shall become a heap, a dwelling place for dragons. Some of your newer translations use jackals there. You know what bothers me? Sometimes you'll read a commentary, and a guy will say, when you look up dragons, instead of saying it's probably a jackal, we'll say, well, this is a fictitious mythological character. Well, what kind of credibility does that give the scriptures? I hope I've told you this before, but one of the difficulties in translating Hebrew for people today is that, context gives you the meaning of words. But when it comes to nouns, that's why you'll see so much difference in the animals that are mentioned in Proverbs and so forth, because a rock badger and things like that, because the nouns, you don't have anything to build around them to figure out what it's talking about. So we shouldn't belittle the Bible just because we don't know exactly what animal that's being talked about here, but I can tell you one thing, it's not a mythological Puff the Magic Dragon, you know. They shall roar together like lions. They shall yell as lions' whelps. In their heat, they think they got it made. I will make their feast, and I will make them drunken, that they may rejoice and sleep a perpetual sleep. I would imagine that when Belteshazzar went to sleep that night, got done with his party. Of course, I think he probably got a little sobering up there when Daniel got done telling him what was going to happen. It was a perpetual sleep. He never rose from it. He was killed and, of course, lost his kingdom. No wake and not wake, saith the Lord. And like I said, Cyrus said he didn't have a battle. There wasn't a battle there to fight. I will bring them down like lambs to the slaughter, like rams with he-goats. And then here in verse 41 is another atbash. If you take the letters and put it into the Hebrew, you'd come out with Babylon. It's just another name, another code word. It's what Brother Jackson, Wayne Jackson, says. The technical term, of course, is what we looked at a moment ago, the atbash. But that Shishak is it's talking about Babylon. How is it taken? And how is the praise of the whole earth surprised? How is Babylon become an astonishment? The sea has come up upon Babylon. She is covered with the multitude of the waves thereof. In other words, been wiped out. Verse 44, and I will punish Baal of Babylon. Baal of Babylon doesn't even really exist. But the thought of this false god that they thought could protect them, God's going to show, well, you see how that's going to happen. And notice, swallowed up, and the nations shall not flow together anymore unto him, yea, the wall of Babylon shall fall. I think that's pretty interesting. The very wall that has that inscription that Baal protects is going to come down. It says, my people, now this I think is probably what you might call the prophetic perfect. It's so sure that it's going to take place as it is written, as if it already has. My people, go ye out of the midst of her, deliver ye every man his soul from the fierce anger of the Lord, and lest your heart faint, and ye fear for the rumor that shall be heard in the land. Now remember, Jeremiah is writing this, and some of us are just now on our way, or fixing to be on our way, to go to start the captivity. Now some have already been there, so we're already a good probably 15, 20 years into it, the whole 70. But for some of them, they're just now going. And notice this, we talked about Baal before, Baal of Babylon, verse 47, therefore, behold, the days come that I will do judgment upon the graven image of Babylon. She's going to get, he's going to take care of it. And notice verse 49. We think of Galatians, 6, 7, and 8. We reap what we sow. As Babylon hath caused the slain of Israel to fall, so at Babylon shall fall the slain of all the earth. They've been going around giving it to everybody pretty good, Well, now it's going to be their time to receive a loss, and loss of life and so forth. It says, ye that have escaped the sword, go away. Stand not still, remember the Lord afar off, and let Jerusalem come into your mind. here's an encouragement. God is trying to encourage His people who are just on their way, really, some of which, some that are already there. And He says, this is an encouragement. It says, we are confounded because we have heard reproach. Shame hath covered our faces, for strangers are come into the sanctuary of the Lord's house. And, of course, they destroyed the Lord's house. I think it's interesting, the temple had stood for about 370 plus years when it was destroyed. You think about, that's a long time, isn't it? You think about the United States. We ain't been around that long, have we? We got to make it another 50 years practically, 51 years to be 300 years old. It had a good run, but the people just got worse and worse. And notice verse 53, though Babylon should mount up to heaven, though she should fortify the height of her strength, yet from me shall come spoilers unto her. Just again, it is not going to happen. It is going to happen. You are going to be destroyed. And then verse 57, basically what he said earlier in verse 39. Her princes are going to go to sleep, and they're going to sleep a perpetual sleep. Maybe that also has something to do with the fact, like we said, things like this don't happen overnight. This was something that was planned out. There's emissaries and people that know things in other places, and maybe they just basically caught the leadership asleep at the wheel. Verse 58, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the broad walls of Babylon shall be utterly broken. Here we go again. And her high gates shall be burnt with fire, and the people shall labor in vain, and the folk in the fire, and they shall be weary. The word which Jeremiah the prophet commanded Sariah, the son of Neriah, the son of, you can say all those, Maaseiah, when he went to Zedekiah, the king of Judah, into Babylon in the 4th year of his reign. Why he went, we don't know at that time. This is not when he was taken captive. He is going to be taken captive. Remember, he is the rightful ruler he is the king, but he is eventually going to be taken to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. Zedekiah, first of all, Jehoiachin is going to be placed, one of his sons is going to be placed on the throne. He doesn't last a few months. And then you're going to have Zedekiah, another one of Josiah's sons, put on the throne. And that's one of the reasons I think, I kind of feel sorry for him sometimes in a way. A lot of people in Jerusalem didn't count him as being the king. They said, our king's in Babylon right now in captivity. So that always had to be in the back of his mind, I think. And we're going to see how that turns out. But anyway, he gives this, he writes this down, and this Sariah was a quiet prince. Some people believe that he was probably the guy that was a trip planner, if you will. So, and was putting this trip together that they were going to Babylon. So Jeremiah wrote in the book all the evil that should come upon Babylon, even all these words that are written against Babylon. And Jeremiah said to this man, when thou comest to Babylon, shalt see and read all these words to the captives that are already there. And they see what's going to happen. Then shalt thou say, O Lord, thou hast spoken against this place to cut it off, that none shall remain in it, neither man nor beast, but it shall be desolate forever. And it shall be, when thou hast made an end of reading this book, that thou shalt bind a stone to it, and cast it into the midst of the Euphrates. Now, if that's all it said, you might think, well, he's just getting rid of the book so the Chaldeans don't read it and get mad and want to whoop them, But it's also going to be a teaching tool, right? Because when he does that, and thou shalt say, thus shall Babylon sink, and shall not rise up from the evil that I will bring upon her, and they shall be weary. So they get to read that, they hear what's going to happen, and then just like that book, Babylon is going to be destroyed. Now it took a while, right? We're aware of that. Belteshazzar is going to fall to the Medes and the Persians, and then the Medes and the Persians are going to fall to who? Alexander, he got to see Babylon. He took it over, okay? And then after them, who's going to be the next kingdom that comes along? It's going to be the Romans, but by that time, Babylon wasn't the force. Of course, every one of those kingdoms we just mentioned, her power and so forth, reduced. But I think it's interesting, verse 64, thus far are the words of Jeremiah. What is the person who's putting this together telling us? That's what Jeremiah wrote. Now, verse 52 is kind of like an historical appendix, if you will. And what does that mean? Jeremiah may have compiled this material and put it together afterwards, but everything that he had written up to that point, this is an addition to that. Now, who wrote it, we don't really know, but what does this talk about? This talks about that what Jeremiah had been preaching all along, when you had these prophets and you had these priests saying, peace, peace, but there was what? No peace. And this place is going to be destroyed, not after 2 years, you coming back, but it's going to be for 70 years, and you're going to see in chapter 50, well, you know what, we need to finish questions, don't we? In what sense did the fall of Babylon, in what sense would the fall of Babylon be Jehovah's judgment and punishment of Baal? I think we kind of covered that pretty good. Just like the miracles of Egypt. Do you remember the 10 plagues of Egypt, how those were addressed towards different gods? Here, number 3, Jeremiah wrote the details of Babylon's destruction in a book. What did the prophet then tell Sariah to do with the book? Throw it in the Euphrates after tying a stone to it. What was the symbolic meaning of what Sariah did with that book? Well, we read that, didn't we? Babylon's going to be like that book, isn't it? It's going to sink, and it's not going to rise. Well, chapter 2, content of this chapter goes hand in hand with the record of chapter 39, and basically tells us what has taken place. So Zedekiah is going to reign for about 11 years. Notice how old he is. Was 1 and 20 years old when he began to reign. So 11 years is what? Oh, he's running stuff off in there. I didn't know. I thought Peter and Rick was in there scrapping, man, slinging stuff around. 21 years and he reigned for 11. So what's that make him? That's how that math works, ain't it? And then his sons are killed in Riblah in front of him. So those are some pretty young boys that are being, and that's the nature. Man, the worst place to be is in the royal family sometimes, right? Well, he's a young man, and so we put the numbers together there in the first few verses, and we see, and in the 4th month, the 9th day of the month, the famine was sore. So we go back up to when it started, the 9th year, 10th month. You put that together, and we come up with 18 months. 18 months that they have been, had been besieged, and there's no food. And so then the city is broken up, and of course the people try to get away, the soldiers and the king, and they don't make it very far. They catch the king. Notice, they took the king. Verse 8, the army of the Chaldeans pursued after the king, overtook him. They took the king, carried him up to the king of Babylon to Riblah and the land of Hamath. Now, boy, I have a way with that marker, don't I? Okay. You remember when we took Bible geography, you had Tyre, Sidon. They're like here on the, coast of Israel. If you go up, and remember what we called the Fertile Crescent? Riblah would be up in here. It's almost 200 miles from Jerusalem. That's how far they travel. Remember, he's come out to Jericho, though, and started running. They caught him. And so about 200 miles away, they take the princes, they take Zedekiah, and they put out his eyes. They kill many of the princes, young, important young men. And we find that taking place. They burned the house of the Lord there in verse 13. I wrote above that about 370 years, how long it had been there. They break up everything, take everything with them. Verse 24, and the captain of the guard took Sariah, the chief priest, and Zephaniah, the second priest, and the 3 keepers of the door. And he takes the out of the city, the eunuch, which had charge of the men of war, and 7 men of whom were near the king's person. In other words, the inner circle, the king's cabinet, if you will. And they take them. So Nebuchadnezzar, verse 26, the captain of the guard took them and brought them to the king of Babylon in Riblah. And the king of Babylon smote them and put them to death in Riblah in the land of Hamath. Thus Judah was carried away captive out of his own land. This is the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had taken. Of course, you've got 3 listed here, and Brother Campbell's given us a pretty good chart there on the number of folks that were taken. And so we'll kind of parallel that with that. And I want you to notice, though, Zedekiah, I don't think you can picture much worse than having your sons killed in front of you and then your eyes put out, right? That's pretty bad. That's what happened to the puppet king, if you will. Now, the true king, and I hate to say it that way, but the guy who was king was took to Babylon, Jehoiakim. Notice what happens to him, Jehoiachin. It came to pass in the 730 year of the captivity of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month, that evil Merodach, that's who's going to be the next king of Babylon, in the first year of his reign, lifted up the head of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, and brought him forth out of the prison, and let him wear street clothes, if you will, spake kindly unto him, and set his throne above the throne of the kings that are there with him in Babylon. If you think about how many nations, how many kings were thrown in jail by Nebuchadnezzar, that's a big thing. Notice, changed his prison garments, did continually eat bread before him all the days of his life. There's actually a Babylonian tablet that has the amount of food that was given the royal prisoners, and it seems that Jehoiakim and his 5 sons, Jehoiachin and his 5 sons did quite well in that. And notice, and for his diet, there was a continual diet given him of the kings of Babylon every day, a portion, until the day of his death, all the days of his life. So this kind of reveals a trend that we're going to continue to see through Cyrus, and that is that the Jews were kind of respected. Daniel, you got Meshach, Shadrach, Abednego, these guys that have left a great impression on these kings. And so here, Zedekiah, the worst thing that could possibly happen, but Jehoiachin is going to be actually elevated. I guess if you're going to be the top dog in prison, that's at least something, right? But that happens to him there, so you can see maybe the hope, the favor of the Jewish people contrasted with what's happened to Zedekiah and the hope that would come with that. Next week, Brother Campbell's done a great job on Appendix 1 there on page 61. Not that one, that's not the one I want. I want the lessons learned. Might be good if you get a chance. I know you're probably got a lot going on, ready for this quarter to be over, I get it. But there's some great little snippets that we've talked about through the quarter, and just take a look at that if you have opportunity. I hope you do. And then next week, what I would like for you to do is take a real good look at the book of Lamentations. And we're going to spend 2 hours on that, or we're going to spend as much time as needed to cover those 5 chapters, and one of them's really long. Remember, they're going to be in segments of 22 verses each, save one that's actually going to be 3 22s or 66 verses long. It's just one of those things you see sometimes the Hebrews do, just like and the reason I wanted to bring out that Atbash, brethren, the Bible's it's a great book and creative, and like the Psalms, the way the Jews put it together, the way God put it together. The Psalms, you have there's 22 consonants in the Hebrew alphabet and 8 verses each, and if you go through there, you'll see they got Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, and then 8 verses, and all 8 verses started with a particular letter of the alphabet. A all starts with A, B all with B. You're going to see that again in Lamentations, and that's just neat to know that not only do we have the inspired Word of God, but God did these little things to, I think, enrich it for us and make it even more exciting than it already is. Surely appreciate your good attention. Brother Josh, would you be kind enough to dismiss us in a prayer?